Okay, I'm going to give you two arguments, right? And I want you to consider both of them. But no, these arguments both are so powerful that they will have an impact on what is going on in Palestine and the ultimate freedom or not of the Palestinians. The first argument is the current dominant argument, held generally by those in the left in the West and pro-Palestinian Jews and Muslims who generally just follow the first two groups that I've mentioned, And the argument goes like this, that Jews are a vulnerable group, and this vulnerable group must be protected. The way that they protect this vulnerable group is by ensuring that certain language is used. For example, the word Jew should not be used, and equally as important, Jewish power should not be highlighted. There should be no talk of Jewish power, nor of Jewish powerful people. So the elite or powerful elite, for example, powerful billionaires who are Jewish or Jewish press barons, should not be identified at all. The reason being, and this is the historical argument, is that if you mention Jewish power and Jewish use of their power, this was the same as what Hitler did. And when people became aware of what of Jewish power, then nasty things happened to the Jews. And so we don't want that to happen again. And therefore, we must protect this vulnerable community by ensuring that they become almost invisible in many ways. So we'll talk about Zionism, but not Jewish support of Israel. We will talk about white billionaires or right-wing billionaires or right-wing media, but we won't talk about Jewish billionaires who are ultimately involved in commenting on the Palestinian struggle through their media outlets or funding, etc., etc. See how it works? The second argument is this: no, and this is held by a smaller minority of people, but a growing minority of people, and it's a very explosive argument. It goes like this: no, the Jews are not a vulnerable community. They are a powerful minority, probably the most or one of the most powerful communities in the world, and definitely the most powerful minority in the world. And thus they don't need protection. Instead of being a vulnerable, oppressed community, they are a powerful, oppressive community. Now, when we say Jews, we're talking about Jewish Zionists in this term. But 90% of Jews, according to many polls, including to many Jewish polls, are Jewish Zionists. So the vast majority of the Jewish community is almost wholly Zionist and supportive of Israel. One journalist, Jewish journalist, in The Guardian stated that 90% of British Jews had actually travelled to Israel. What percentage of them had served in the army, who knows? So you can see the vast number of Western Jews are supportive of Israel. The argument then follows this, thus it becomes incumbent to push or identify which powerful Jews are supporting Israel and who they are, and if they are Jewish, and if and the extent of their power. Thus highlighting Jewish power becomes a number one priority. Does that make sense? So if you don't highlight Jewish power, what happens is you allow this very powerful force to operate invisibly. It can continue to support Israel, oppress Palestine, continue the occupation of the Palestinians, and yet never be called out. So this new argument says that no, it's vital to understand Jewish power. It's vital to understand the powerful elite that are backing Israel, and there should be no gatekeeping or demands to silence or make invisible that community support for Israel. Because as long as you make that community invisible and allow it to continue to support this fascist, racist state, then the Palestinians will ultimately prolong their suffering, and they prolong their occupation. You see the two arguments diametrically opposed? One claims anti-Semitism because it claims the Jews are vulnerable. The other says, no, it's nothing to do with anti-Semitism. You are giving Jews privilege by crying anti-Semitism, when the real oppressed people are the Palestinians or the Muslims who are suffering Islamophobia due to Jewish billionaires, Jewish Zionist billionaires, funding the Islamophobia industry and, of course, backing Israel. So here's the conundrum. Which is right? One is a tiny spark that is growing. The other is a dominant position. What we would argue are gatekeepers, are stoppers of the real highlighting of the truth of what is going on. Lastly, a couple of points. When we say Jews or Jewishness, listening to Gilad Altsman, and just kind of understanding some of the things he says and some of his followers says, really crystallized my thoughts in this respect. What are Jews? What is Jewishness? And what he argues is, well, it's a number of things, and also a very fluid concept. Jews are a community, a people. The Quran itself describes Jews as a people. Yes. And also, it's a religion. It's a religious philosophy, but also it's a cultural identity as well. So it's not just a belief system. It's not just a racial idea, but it's also a cultural idea and an identity. And it can be all three things or just a number of them. And the oppressed should be allowed to understand that the people, the vast majority of people who are oppressing them. I recently read a very interesting piece by a Jewish author, and he dug into the anti-Semitism of Christianity and Christians, and he looked at the kind of racism of Christian doctrine, or in his mind the kind of anti-Semitism of Christian doctrine, the hatred by Christian priests of Jews throughout the ages. And I thought, and thus he led it to the Holocaust. His conclusion was that's how the Holocaust happened. And I thought, isn't that interesting? That a Jew can say that about Christians. He can look at their faith. He can look at them as a people. He can look at them as a cultural and ethical a cultural group, a social group. And he can look at all his facets to understand his oppression as to what led to the Holocaust. And yet Muslims are denied to the same level of analysis of why Jews are killing them in Palestine and Israel, or why Jews hate them and are so right-wing these days, supporting Islamophobia. And that's the crux. One argue that you can't say that about Jews because they're vulnerable. And the other argument now is, no, they're no longer vulnerable. They are one of the most powerful people in the world, and we have every right to explore and understand who these people are, what their beliefs are, from A to Z. Whether that we need to understand their religion, we should be allowed to talk about it. Does that have any impact on how they're oppressing the Palestinians or their view of the Palestinians? Does the Old Testament or the Talmud have any impact on how they behave towards the Palestinians? Maybe not. But we are currently denied that right, and that prolongs or allows us to remain in a state of ignorance. And anyone who's ignorant of the people killing him will never be free. So these interesting points I'll put out to you. I would love to hear your thoughts, for and against. I know the majority of people out there are against what I've just said in the last segment, and I'd like to know why. Thanks. Assalamu alaikum.